Hi everyone, welcome back to the second episode this year of the Digital Digest video series. I'm joined today by Melinda Rees, CEO of Psyomics. Hi Melinda, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for joining me today. For those of you that haven't had the pleasure of meeting or speaking or learning from Melinda, she is a psychologist by background. She's earned her stripes through a 20-year career as a clinical leader in the NHS before entering into the industry. Over the last 10 years, Melinda has had a series of strategic leadership roles across startup, scale up, and enterprise environments, and now CEO of Psyomics, founded in 2015 and spun out from Cambridge University. Psyomics is a precision mental health technology company working with the NHS and independent sector across the UK, US, and Middle East, enabling personalised care for mental health patients and increased workforce productivity, which I think we can all agree is super important in the world that we live in today, and with the daily headlines that we are seeing. So, welcome, Melinda. I don't know if I've done a good job encapsulating your background and Psyomics there, but please do share anything else that you want to highlight.
Well, I'll just say a little bit about Psyomics. So we were founded in 2015 by Professor Sabine Barn. Sabine is a practicing NHS psychiatrist and a professor of neurotechnology at Cambridge. And she was keen to find a way of diagnosing bipolar disorder more efficiently, sooner, faster, better, more accurately, because it takes between 9 and 12 years for an adult to receive a diagnosis of bipolar disorder in the UK. And actually, that wait time is really common. And you can imagine in that decade of waiting for your diagnosis and not knowing what's going on, if you're that person, but having really low mood that feels untreatable, not being able to find solutions for how you're feeling is pretty devastating.
Yeah.
And it does lead to really poor quality of life for a lot of people. So Sabine's ambition was to support people to get a diagnosis sooner, therefore they can get help sooner. And she started out doing that by looking for a biomarker that would correlate highly with bipolar 1 disorder. And she spent the first 5 years of this period of her chapter of her career doing that, 2015 to 2019, 2020. She started to identify a biomarker and got quite close to something that looked very promising. At the same time, developed a digital platform that also could potentially diagnose for bipolar disorder. And she compared the two things together in a clinical trial. And the commercial outcome of that trial was that the platform, the digital platform, had more kind of near-term promise in terms of clinical accuracy and ability to be used in market in the NHS. So the company pivoted from a biotech company to a health tech company in about 2020. And since then, we've been developing out the digital platform. And I joined 2.5 years ago to help commercialize that platform, take it to market, get the NHS to use it, and so on. There's a lot more to say, but I'm going to pause there.
No, that's great. It's good to get a bit more of a background as to how it all started. I think it adds a lot more narrative and colour, and it's been a really impressive journey that you've been on. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Something that we have discussed, Melinda, beforehand, and I know that it's something that you're really keen to be transparent about. And all we see on good news on LinkedIn, right? But a lot of people don't share some of the challenges that's faced by the industry. And previous guests have spoken to me about some of the scaling issues and most effective scaling strategies that they have seen, like pharma partnerships, direct to consumer, med tech partnerships, you name it. What
Yeah.
have been kind of especially in the mental health space, what have been the biggest sort of scaling challenges for Psyomics, and what have been the learns along the way?
Yeah, so I'll talk from the last 2.5 years so that I'm talking from my experience and not kind of
Yeah.
pretending I know what went before in any detail. But I think we wanted the NHS to be our first commercial partner,
Mhm.
and we want to build a really collaborative co-development partnership with the NHS. But we have to stay commercially astute whilst we're doing that. We're a business, we've got investors, it's a reality.
Yeah.
The NHS, it they're great partners when you get hold of them. So actually, getting a first contract is always going to be really, really tough We're very lucky to have a first contract partnership with a mental health trust that has been hugely beneficial to our ability to build out the platform and make it right for the end user, the patient. So that's been a great first partnership, and we've got half a dozen more since then. But the NHS market is necessarily quite slow moving. You know, the headlines are cuts, 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 cuts. So whilst we've got 2 million people waiting on mental health waiting lists for treatment, the trusts, that primary care organisations, that integrated care systems are preoccupied with trying to stay alive. So they want to engage, but they're extremely busy trying to stay alive. And they know that they will be more efficient and better quality service if they engage with us. But it's really difficult for them to get things over the line and move. So it's a slow market for us commercially, hence looking internationally, because we've got investors. So then as a very small team, you have to start hedging your bets and looking at other markets. We are looking at distribution partners in Australia. We are looking for partnership in the US with providers. I can say more about that later, but there's opportunity there despite the economic climate there as well, which is really labile and unpredictable right now. But we're also looking at the Middle East, and all of these places have very slow sales cycles. But we're also looking at the Middle East because the Middle East is a very forward-thinking market. They're really interested in being the best, the first, leapfrogging what they don't need to do all the traditional stuff that we've gone through very slowly in the UK. They can go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in their thinking, and there's money in the market. But the challenge for us there and in the US is you have to deploy teams there. So wherever you look, there's pros and cons. And I guess we're now a team of 20. We've been half that size for quite a long time, plus the lab in Cambridge University. It's really hard to do all of those things. You know, how many planes can you get on? And conversely, business is all about forming trusting partnerships. You have to form relationships, and you can only do so much of that on a screen. So there's a real bandwidth issue. And we are B2B. We aren't doing direct to consumer. The main reason for that is the marketing costs of something like what we do, and it's quite niche. And I feel we can reach more end users if we go through a collaborative partnership agreement. So there's some of the dilemmas. There's thousands of dilemmas. I mean, there's so many difficulties to hurdle.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that, you know, the UK is very different to other markets, but they all have their own challenges. And you know, I think it's going to be a really interesting journey that you go on. The Middle East is a really exciting market at the moment. We're seeing lots more innovation, and as you said, things are moving quite quickly there. So looking forward to following the journey there. I guess when it comes to the digital mental health space, it's become quite crowded. It's obviously been a hot topic over recent years. And sometimes I guess you can have the dominant players pushing out some of the really innovative smaller organizations. So how have you managed to, I guess, stay competitive? And what do you think is needed from the industry to kind of level out this playing field?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a lot in the market around the prevention and workplace well-being side. There isn't much in the market on the sickness side. So we've got a National Health Service, it's a National Sickness Service, really. There isn't a lot that's got into that market successfully yet in terms of digital health tech. One of the reasons is it's all very new. Second reason is that regulatory bar is super high. So if you make anything, you've got to take it through MHRA regulatory frameworks, costs a lot of money, can take 2 years. You've got to do clinical investigations. So I guess we've got a bit of a first mover advantage around what we do, which is more at the triage, assessment, diagnostic end. We don't do treatment, so we're quite different from a lot of the other opportunities out there for patients. There are other companies who've got chatbots who are doing kind of therapeutic interventions. And of course, people can go direct to ChatGPT and other AI engines and try that out for themselves, and that people are experimenting on the treatment side. But I guess for us, the piece that we are trying to support clinicians and workforce productivity with is a very highly skilled piece of work, that triage, assessment, diagnostic, getting a person on the right pathway, understanding what that person really needs, understanding the engagement, motivation, and ability for that person to change, and being able to work across a really broad spectrum of potential diagnoses. And because we started out at the moderate to severe end of mental ill health, bipolar disorder, we have a very kind of rich algorithmic approach, and it takes ages to get that evidence base together. So I'm not sure I answered your question. I suppose what I'm saying is there's a lot out there, but in the sickness market, which I'm going to call, there actually isn't very much at all yet.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, no, I think when we first chatted, I was particularly, interested in the triaging aspect, because you think it's such a simple idea. Like, why aren't we doing this already?
Yes.
To make sure that patients are being seen quicker, and we're reducing the backlog of patients, and they're seeing the right people, etc. So yeah, it was super interested in that, and it's amazing work that you're doing to kind of tackle some of those challenges.
Mm.
You mentioned the regulatory piece,
Yeah.
and the kind of cost and the length of time that takes.
Yes.
How are you balancing that with the need for how quickly innovation is happening at the moment?
We have a very supportive set of investors that understand the road is going to be a little bit long, and it's the same all over the world. So you can either develop something that has no regulatory framework applied to it, but the potency of what you develop then is tricky, where is it going to go in the market? Is it going to go in the NHS helping with people who are very unwell? Probably not. It's then going to go into the workplace market or the direct to consumer market. That's a very full market. So you might think if you're developing something that doesn't need a regulatory approval, you might think you're going to save time and go under that radar and still help people. But the fact is, there are a lot of people doing that stuff, and there are very few people going through the regulatory approach. So it's short-term pain, long-term gain is our approach.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's difficult to get investment at the moment as well. You have to have a use case that attracts investors who understand the healthcare market well and understand the sales cycle and the regulatory cycles.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, it's really important to also go through those regulatory clinical trials, etc. It adds so much more weight to the application and the outcomes eventually. Is there anything that can be done to kind of, I guess, shift the conversation away from awareness around mental health and actually towards more systemic change?
Mm. Gosh, that's a
Early
brilliant question. I love that question. Yes, because I was talking about the National Sick Service, and what we really want is to stop people getting ill in the first place, right? It would be wonderful. The thing I always come up against commercially on the prevention side is that you'd have to have buy-in from investors who'd be prepared to stick around for 15 years. That's how long it would take to change
Yeah.
anything. You then have to have a payer that's invested in paying for that. And if you look at election cycles in the Western world, they're 4 years.
Yeah.
So whilst our current government talks are really good, and I'm sure believes prevention is the approach to the future, and we think about population health, and we think about integrated care systems, and in the US ACOs, systems that are looking at the lifetime wellness of people, and they know that if they can prevent type 2 diabetes, they save a life and they save the economy. But actually putting that into practice when you've got short funding cycles and you're firefighting illness is really hard. It's really hard to make space for it. So there's lots we could do. And there's plenty of literature, knowledge, and research around there about what we could do. You could bring up children differently. And we could give people houses and food. Like, there's really basic stuff we could do, and jobs. But actually turning that into a commercial entity is really challenging.
Yeah, No, for sure. No, thank you, Melinda. That's really insightful. And I guess that kind of leads me on to my final question, which I always like to finish up with is talking about your predictions for 2025 and beyond, I guess for the digital health industry, but more specifically
Yeah.
digital mental health as well.
Yeah. Gosh, so I've been very privileged in the last 2 days to spend in depth looking at the US economy with a bunch of experts across academia, healthcare delivery, politics, law, and finance. And what was obvious to me was nobody can predict the future right now. And we started the last 2 days with Lord David Pryor, who had a not an optimistic vision for the future in healthcare, for the next 4 or 5 years, uh,
Yeah,
because it feels like there's no money around. It feels like there are going to be there's going to be scarcity. It feels like, Medicaid might be cut in the US. It
right.
feels like we're going to make lots of people redundant all over the world because the economy is crashing, and that necessarily impacts well-being and generations, actually, not just the person who's impacted directly.
Mm,
That said, one of the ways to unlock all of this is to provide adjunctive support to clinical workforce, and one of those things will be digital technology. And do we bypass traditional delivery methods and go direct to consumer so that patients then, I'm calling them patients, people, then have the power to directly access stuff they want for their own healthcare, don't have to go through a gatekeeper, don't have to go through an insurer or a GP, don't have to be out of pocket. They can use the internet, which is, a lot cheaper than a lot of the stuff that's otherwise available. So I think that consumers are going to become more powerful, consumers of healthcare, you and me and everybody watching this. I think we need to take up that power and start shaping the way that healthcare is delivered in the future. We can pay attention to all the talk about financial cuts, but healthcare is really important, always has been, always will be, and we'll always want more of it. So
Yeah.
there's opportunity. The market might slow down a bit in the traditional market. It will pick back up again. And I think we will find lots of companies like ours looking at the Middle East and Singapore, Australia, other possibilities to tide us over the next 4 or 5 years in terms of revenue, so that we can keep going in the NHS, so that we can go and try and see if we're useful to the US economy as
Yeah.
well.
No, that's yeah. I mean, you make a great point. I think what we have definitely seen is a move to kind of shifting the power from clinicians and providers and payers to the patient, so that they can take a bit more ownership over their care. As you said, healthcare and the improvement of healthcare is never going to go away. We're
Yeah.
always going to need it to be improved, especially as the population increases, etc. So, yeah, no, really looking forward to seeing how that change happens. I know there's a lot of companies sort of coming through now trying to kind of force that change. So I think it's an exciting time, but as you
Mm,
said, a bit of yeah, hesitancy around it as well. But
mm.
it will always be here, as you said.
Yeah, I think so. We've just got to get through the hard times.
Absolutely. And we're all in it together. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining me, Melinda. If anybody has any questions for Melinda, I'm sure you're happy for people to reach out to you
Yes.
on LinkedIn. Um,
Yes.
but thank you so much for your time. Been lovely to chat to you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.